Okay, in the next set of videos we're going to get into C# helper classes where we're going to call them from the business rule engine. And the first thing is, if you deal with static methods, which is very common, you're going to need to do a little trick in the registry using regedit. And so first of all, let me show you, sometimes we all forget there's documentation for BizTalk, right? So if you go to BizTalk here, there's this little icon, the question mark, called BizTalk Server Documentation. And if you go there, there's a section here under Development called Creating and Using Business Rules. And then under that, you'll find Creating Business Rules, and then selecting Facts and using a .NET assembly, and then invoking a static member of a class. And this bit us a couple times because we did it on our developer machines, and then we went to QA, things weren't working. And we totally forgot, because it had been like weeks or months ahead of time, that we had made these registry settings on our own machines. So we had to create procedures that when the administrators installed BizTalk on the QA and the production servers, that they also had to set these registry settings. So we're going to do that right now. So we're going to start regedit, which you could do from the DOS command prompt here. And then we follow the instructions on this help or documentation. We're going to go to HKey local machine, software Microsoft business rules. So it's HKey local machine, software, then Microsoft, then business rules, and then under 3.0. And then what you're looking for is a field called static support. Okay, and I don't think it's going to be there. The first time you go to a machine, there is no variable over here called static support, so you're going to have to add it. But first, just make sure it's not there, because if it's there, then you can check to see if it has a value of 0, 1, or 2. So if it's not there, let's just make our screen a little bigger. Okay, we're going to right-click New Key, and then we're going to call it, I'm sorry, it's not a key, it's a value. Delete that. New D-word value, and then static support, and then what number do we want to put there? So 0 is the default. The rule engine follows the BizTalk Server 2004 model, where static method is called only when an instance of the net class is asserted. 1, an object instance is not required. The static method is called when the rule is evaluated or executed. Or 2, an object instance is not required. The static method is called at the policy transition time. So the question is, do you want it to call every time or only or less often, which is a better performance? And we're going to go ahead and choose option number 1 here. By the way, here's the instructions how to add the new field called static support, the fact that it's a D word. So now we're going to go back and set the value there to 1. And make sure you've got a 1 in that column, and then you're set to go. So in this case, if you're running an orchestration, you'd want to restart the BizTalk host. In our case, we want to close and reopen the composer so that next time we test, it'll make sure it picks up that new registry entry. Now, in order to show you an example of our first C# routine, let us add a new field here called output file name. And it's a string, so that's good. So what might happen is, for instance, you might want to take the ID of the customer and put it in the file name. So you might want to concatenate the ID plus the name plus a GUID and make that the output file name. So let's suppose we want to concatenate 3 fields together. So back in the business rule composer here, let's go back to Neil Demo, which was the rule I created that has the high priority of 999 down here. And it has a 1 = 1 so that it always runs first. And now let's get our new schema. So we go back to schemas here, browse, and to save time again, we're going to go to this part of the directory. Pick the loan processing and click our schema. And now we should see file name down here. So we're going to put file name here, Now suppose we want to concatenate 2 or 3 fields together. What functions do we have available? As you see here, you have some of the math functions, add, day of week, divider, and so on, but there is no concatenate function. So how do I concatenate, for instance, the person's last name and then also get a new GUID? So we need to call a C# routine to do this. So on my disk from a previous class, I have a common library. And so what I usually tend to do is just have one common library with all my obviously common routines on it, and then that kind of grows over time. So what I did is I put that on the disk under Source, BizTalk Training, Common, and then it's BizTalk Training, Common Library, and then it's C#. Okay, I'm just trying to look there. Yeah, it has an 8 on it actually. So it was created with Visual Studio 2005, not 2008. It would have a 9 on it if it was built with 2008. And here we have a class which has our orchestration helpers in it. So really I should rename this to orc helpers, like that. Now, just for organizational purposes, what I would normally do then is I will have different helpers for different functions. So for instance, I might have a class here called, as soon as it opens, map helpers. And then I might have one called, I'll call it BRE, for Business Rule Engine. A lot of people call the business rules just BRE. Business Rule Engine Helpers. And of course these could be common routines that could be called from other places. But let's do here public string void, and then I don't mean void, I mean public static, that's what I meant, static string, and we'll call this concat 2 fields, and we have string 1 and string str2. And then what we'll do is return string 1 plus string 2. So obviously you can concatenate like that using C#. And then to make it really easy, what if you want to concatenate 2 or 3 fields? Well, you could actually wrap concat 2 and then call it recursively, but that gets kind of ugly. So I've done this before where I'll create concat 3 and I'll have 3 fields. And this just makes it a lot easier to read when you're in the business rule engine. If you want to, for some reason, concatenate 4 fields, you just do the same thing here. It's not particularly elegant, but it's very effective. Okay, so I have concat 2, 3, and 4. So now let's save that, do a build. And now we have to put that in the GAC in order for the business rule engine to be able to see it. So we're going to go here to our bin, debug, and from there we want to copy to the GAC. So I'm going to open another Windows Explorer down here, and the GAC of course is called C Windows Assembly. And then just my windows are a little too big here. I want to copy that DLL into the assembly, so I just drag and drop it. Okay, so now if we go back to the business rule engine, for the first time we're going to call a .NET class. So we go here to .NET Assemblies, Browse, and now we have to find BizTalk Training, and there it is, Common Library, has the version number. Click OK. And for some reason we don't have the BRE helpers. We only have the orc helpers. So first question is, did I make it public? And did I really GAC it? So we have class, public, public, public. Okay, so we're going to try again. We're going to go to Assemblies, Browse, and we've already gacked this again, BizTalk Common Library, and there's our new class BRE Helpers. And let me show you why it wasn't appearing. Sometimes the simplest little things can slow you down for even 30 minutes or an hour. So when I added the new map helpers and BRE helpers, it creates a dummy class here for you, but it doesn't put the word public in front of it. So if you want this class to appear, you have to put public. So my whole problem was I didn't have the word public in front of BRE helpers, even though my methods were public. I have to make my class public as well. So now that we have the method, let's use it in one of our rules. So here's our unsaved version 1.3 of the rules. And what we were talking about here was building a file name. So I'm going to say here, browse to my schema. Okay, which was C, Program Files, Microsoft, BizTalk, SDK. Then it was Samples, Business Rules, Loan something, and then Case, XSD. Let's delete this rule. This was something I was testing earlier we don't need now. Let's put our output file name here. And now here we want to use our concatenate function. So the first one is how many things do we want to concatenate? So let me show you that you could nest it. I don't like doing it this way. So like here, you could have BRE helpers concat, and then concat2 could actually be string 1. And so if you want to concatenate 3 things, you could concatenate like this. And that's why I say, to me, that's kind of confusing. I've seen languages that do it that way, but let's do it a little bit easier way. So let's delete all these. Let's decide at first, do we want to concatenate 1, 2, 3, 4 things? So I want, say, the customer name, the ID, and a GUID. So I don't have a GUID logic yet, right? So let's actually go do that real quick. So we'll go back here, and just to return a GUID, you can say public. I'm going to return it as a string. And we'll say return system.guid.newguid. And then we need to convert that to a string. So I just need to compile that now. And I have to gack it again. So here's my DLL and the gack. Drag it in there. And here's another thing you need to know. .NET, caches DLLs, and so this program called the Business Rule Composer doesn't know yet that we've changed that DLL. So one more time, we're going to have to close and reopen the whole Biz Rule Composer. And of course, when we do that, we lose everywhere we were, our positioning. So I need to reopen this rule. And again, I will delete this because I didn't save it last time. And now I need my schema again. And unfortunately, it always forgets where you were. It will remember as long as you don't close it. But once you close it, it starts all over. So let's put the file name here. Now we need our .NET class again. So we say browse. Go to BizTalk Common Library. Go to BRE Helpers. And there's our GUID routine. So now I want to concatenate, say, 3 things. The first one is going to be, go back to my schema, the ID of the person. And then, now notice this is going to be another problem. You can actually, I think they kind of fixed it in 2006, but in 2004 for sure, you could actually run off the screen over here with these variables. It could basically get so wide that you couldn't even scroll. So we want to take the ID, the person's name, and then the GUID, because we want to make sure it's totally unique. So our GUID is over here. So the third parameter, string 3, is going to be a GUID. Okay, so I think we're ready to test that. We have here BRE helpers, concat 3. The first parm is the ID. The second parm is the name. And the third parm is a GUID. So let's save that and test it. So we click on our schema, add our sample file, and click test. The fast way to know if it worked or not is just to go back to the disk. Oops, there's a faster way. You get an error. Okay, this is another famous gotcha that we haven't hit yet. The business rule engine cannot add an element to the file that's not there. And that is definitely one of the things we were going to cover in one of the upcoming videos. So it cannot create new fields. It can only put values in fields that exist. So we don't have an output file name in our sample file. So what we're going to have to do is go to that directory. And here we've been using sample 2. So let's open it with Notepad, or we can open it in Visual Studio too and edit it with the XML editor. Then we want to add output file name here, but we want to make sure we spell it correctly. So it's output file name. The O and the F are capital. The N is not capital. So here I'll put output file name, and I'm not going to put any value there, and I'm just going to save that. So now I can just test it again. That first test failed, obviously. So I'll say test policy. Took a minute for that to load. We still have our file there. Click test. And it ran. Now to know if it ran correctly, we go back to our file again, open it with Notepad or Visual Studio, and now you can see we did get a file name, and it looks like it's just sort of a GUID. So, oh, I know. The GUID, I think, actually starts with the 8. So we did get the number 1 there, and then the guy didn't have a name. So let's suppose here we did put name as Neil Walters. And of course we can have spaces in file names. It's not the best. So let's save that. And let's test it one more time. Click the test button. And then basically as soon as it's done again, we go back here, open our file again. And so now you can see a little more clear. We have 1 Neil Walters, and then we have a GUID. So what we've done in this video is basically we've created a C# helper library with some string functions here. Other string functions, basically these are just wrappers for standard .NET functions. And you might want to create one like instr, or what is it? I'm thinking VB script. When you want to return an in string, it's like index of. You might want to create a wrapper for index of. You might want to create a wrapper for length. You might want to create one for substring and some of these others. So by wrapper, what I mean is you simply create a little C#, usually 1 or 2 lines of code here that simply wraps that function and makes it available to the business rule engine. Because, for instance, you cannot here, if you wanted to know the length of a field, for instance, there's no way you could say here like field.length. It's just there's no way to do it. It doesn't have IntelliSense like C# class, like C# and Visual Studio has. So you'd have to write a class or a method called length and then pass it the parentheses, the field, and then it would return an integer, for example. So we created the helper class, and then we used it in the rule here. We put it in the GAC, and we called it, and we used the concatenate function and the GUID function to return an output file name. So that concludes this video.